What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be re-gearing my buddy Andrew's third Gen Tacoma. He got the third members from East Coast Gear Supply, so it makes it real easy. You don't have to actually mess with any of the gears. It's all quite literally just a bolt-in process, so we're going to get right into that. Alright, we're going to start off doing the rear diff, so if anybody's two-wheel drive watching this, it gets right to what they need to see. First thing you want to do is, obviously once you get your truck up on jack stands or up on a lift, go ahead and put it in neutral, because we're going to have to take these drive shaft bolts loose, and you want the drive shafts to be able to spin freely, so you can get easy access to them. Go ahead and pull your fill plug, and then pull your drain plug and drain your rear diff fluid. Normally when you go to remove a drive shaft, you want to put an index mark so you know you could mate them back up to the same orientation they came off. In this case, it's a new third member, so we don't have to do that. So you go ahead and remove your drive shaft bolts. If your flange is a little stuck right here, you can always just take a screwdriver. Actually, right here is a perfect spot, and kind of give it a little pry, and it'll come loose just like that. Just push forward like that, and then we're just going to we don't have to remove the rest of the drive shaft, so we're just going to let this hang like this. Before we can unbolt the rear diff, we're actually going to have to be able to unbolt the rear wheel bearing assembly from the axle flange itself. So what we're going to do is remove this 12mm here. You're going to unplug your wheel speed sensor because you do not want to break that. And then the brake lines, you could either undo the brake line and slide it out to bleed the system, or you can, what we're going to try to do is unbolt a few of these brackets here, and maybe we'll get enough slack to be able to pull it out just far enough so the axle shafts are not in the diff and we can get it removed. So what we did here is we removed 12mm, another 12mm, and then here, here, and here. And that just kind of let this whole brake line harness be free. So we should have some nice amount of slack from that, so we can move this whole assembly back. Next, there's 14mm nuts. There's 4 on each side. Go ahead and break all those loose and remove them, and we'll proceed to sliding the axle shafts out. Once you get your nuts loose, it shouldn't take much if it's a newer truck. As you can see, just me hitting it with my fist, it's already separating. Same for the other side. When I did my truck, which I never recorded, this was actually pretty stuck. I ended up having to use an air hammer and soak it with penetrating oil. This being a newer truck, that's not an issue. So just a heads up, you may run into that being slightly stuck if you've been off-road a lot and done a lot of water crossings and everything like that. Looks like we might just have enough stretch to get the rear differential out with these axles. I just used some like 1/2-inch sockets to help space it. You could use little chunks of wood or anything that's available to you, really. As you can see, I've just kind of straightened out some of this brake line just a little bit, not too much. Nothing that's not going to hurt it or anything like that. It is pretty heavy, as you can imagine, if you already have an assembled third member. So if you don't think you're capable of carrying this out, trans jack or a floor jack with a little piece of wood or something to help catch it if you're doing it on the ground, that would be a good idea. We got 2 connectors you're going to want to undo here. These sensors come on the assembled third member from East Coast Gear Supply, so you don't have to worry about removing them from the third member. Just go ahead and unplug them and move that harness back out of the way. We got 10 14mm nuts. We'll go ahead and remove all those, and just beware once you start to remove them, the rear diff is going to start to separate from the axle housing. So just be ready to keep it steady or catch it. I don't think it's going to fall right out on you, but just be ready for that. Here you can see the stub shafts I was talking about. That's the whole reason you have to unbolt that and push it that way. With the third member removed, it's basically just a big empty cavity. And this is factory gasket. We have a brand new OEM Toyota gasket. So we're going to scrape this off, clean the surface, put that on there, and then put our new third member in and reverse the process. So we'll get right to it. So we got the old gasket off, took a razor blade, scraped all the excess material off. We're going to make sure the surface is nice and clean. Took a can of brake cleaner, sprayed out the inside, took some rags, wiped out, made sure there was no debris down in there. It just overall just made everything sure it was nice and clean. Next, we're going to put our OEM gasket on. This is your differential gasket. There's the part numbers right there. This is directly from Toyota. You could probably get one from AutoZone or something of that nature as well. There is some obvious dips that correlate with the differential itself, so you can obviously see to line those up, put it on the studs. Went ahead and put our washers and our nuts on. We took a gun and just lightly snugged them up in a crisscross pattern, just like tightening a wheel. Next, we're going to torque them to 18 foot-pounds, also in a crisscross pattern, like a star pattern, just so it tightens down evenly. All of our nuts are torqued. Put this little cover back on. It protects those two sensors, just some 12 millimeters, just kind of hand tight those. Next, we're going to start assembling the rest. Obviously, reverse procedure from how you took it off. Another thing to note is that there is an O-ring right here. Just make sure this O-ring's in good shape and not flat or dry rot or hard or cracked or anything like that. And take a rag and I'm gonna wipe all this up. One thing I'm gonna do, because when mine was stuck, it was because of rust on this flange. So before assembly, this is it's called Moly Lube. It's metal to metal lubrication. So I'm just gonna paint just a little bit on there, not too much. If it ever has to come apart again, chances of it being stuck are very slim. Next, we get our drive line back on. Same thing, we'll put our nuts back on the studs, and we're going to torque these to 65 foot-pounds. This is the gear oil recommended by East Coast Gear Supply, 85-140 Lucas non-synthetic. And of course, this is only our break-in oil, so this will be in the truck for the first 500 miles, and then after that it'll get changed out again for the same fluid. But this is what they recommend to use, so that's what we're putting in there. This is TRD off-road, and it took right about 4 quarts. So you can see, dip it in there, and the fluid's right there at the top, and it'll also dribble out just a little bit when it's full. All right, moving on to the front diff. We took our our Allen. It's a T10, and went ahead and removed the fill plug, which is right there, and then the drain plug, and let all the fluid drain out. And then next we are going to pull both of the front axles. Each axle nut has a dust cover. To remove that, I normally just take a little chisel like this and get it wedged in between this lip. And once it starts to pop out some, I take some big channel locks from here and here and kind of wiggle it right off. After you get your dust cover off, there's going to be a cotter pin and this locking piece. Go ahead and remove both of those. There's a 35 millimeter axle nut on each side. Go ahead and remove those. There's a little dent right here. You can take some sort of chisel if your axle's stuck. This one is nice and free, as you can see. Down here there are two 19 millimeters that hold the ball joint, or actually bolt the ball joint assembly to the spindle. We're gonna have to remove those. A trick for getting these axle stubs out of your hub is, if you're doing the driver's side, turn it all the way towards the driver's side. That extends the tie rod, so that now you'll be able to push on the stub of the shaft, and you'll be able to pull it like this, and it'll give you plenty of room to pull it out of there. So sometimes they could be a little stuck They give you these little flat spots right here. You can take a long chisel or a long screwdriver with a hammer and kind of beat it out this way just a little bit to get it moving. Another thing, you can get a screwdriver to pry in between the diff and here. Just be careful not to mangle this flange, but just a little bit of doing it should come right out. Just like when we did the rear, we got to remove the drive shaft from the diff itself. Same thing, just some 14 millimeters. Alright, so we got connector here. We got our bigger connector that is on our four-wheel drive actuator right here. There's a vacuum line and then the breather line on the top of the diff. It's all kind of hard to show you. There's an assembly right here that kind of holds the harness and everything like that. There's one 12 millimeter on top that you should be able to undo, and that whole bracket will kind of stay up out of the way once you unplug that. And then there's also a bracket that holds that vacuum line and that breather over here. Another 12 millimeter. Remove both of those, both the connectors, unplug the lines, and then all that stuff should stay and allow us to remove the front differential. All right, we got our harnesses unplugged, our vacuum line, our vent line off the top of the diff. All the other brackets are out of the way. We've got both the axles out. The only thing left holding this thing in is these front bolts here, and then this rear one here. These are 22 millimeter. It's got a 19 millimeter nut on top. The rear bolt there, it's actually an Allen, which this is a 12. Although this differential is quite a bit lighter, or feels quite a bit lighter than the rear, it's a little more tricky. So I'm using a trans jack. You could use a regular floor jack with a piece of wood or something to kind of help you stabilize it. Just because when you get your arms up in the air trying to wrestle something for a while, you start to lose your strength. So it's good to have something to rely on to catch it or kind of rest it on while you're trying to figure out how to get it out. As you can see, the technique was to rotate the front down. There's a stud that goes in the frame right here, and that's the tricky part. That's kind of what hangs you up. Once you rotate the front down, you can kind of pick the back up, and then from there it kind of nose dives out of there. Just to give you a better look, this is that vent line I was talking about. Here is the vacuum line for the actuator, and then you saw the connectors, and those brackets, one bolted here and one bolted here. So that's all that's attached to the diff, besides all the other obvious things before you can take it down. That's the assembly we pulled out of the truck. This is the assembly they give you. We're gonna have to swap some things over, including this whole shaft right here, as well as these mounts. There's also gonna be a stub shaft that we have to swap that I guess some people easily forget. They put a little note in there that says not to forget it. And so I'll show you how to swap that over as well. To remove this assembly right here, it requires kind of a special socket called an E14. And then this will separate from the differential. As you can see, it is sealed by just like a silicone gasket maker like Toyota RTV. This is the stub shaft, which the sticker refers to. They don't want you to forget. We'll pop that out, and then there's also a like little splash shield looking thing that we gotta pop out and put into the new differential as well. Here is our stub shaft that came out of this side. How I got it out is if you look from this side, that pin's in the way, but you can take a long screwdriver and just barely get the edge of it, as you can see all the daylight through there, and just take a hammer and just lightly tap it, and it'll start to pop out this side. And then once it's sticking out this side a little more, you can take a screwdriver and easily pry it out. So this isn't on the new differential. When I did mine, I swapped it over. I believe it's almost, imagine like an oil pan baffle, some type of fluid baffle of some sort, or I don't know. But anyways, we're gonna go ahead and swap that over as well. Now you see we have installed it into the new diff. What I had to do is this one lip was just take a pair of channel locks and just very slightly tweak it outward. That way, as you were taking a little screwdriver and just lightly seating this, it had some more friction because it was a little loose in there. But yeah, other than that, it fits in there nice and tight. Can't pull it out with your fingers too easy or anything. So now we can put the stub shaft in. This just kind of sets down in the hole. And just lightly tap it into place. Notice I didn't use the metal part of the hammer, I used the side of it that was soft. Got our baffle in, we got our stub shaft in. We got both of our surfaces nice and clean and dry, free of oil. Next, I'm going to use actually this stuff. It's called the right stuff, and it's been awesome. I've used it a ton at work. We're just going to put a small bead all the way around here, and then we're going to install this onto the diff. Here's all of our parts swapped over. Got this mounting bracket here. Obviously the drain and fill plug. We got this rear mount, this sensor, and I believe that's it. So at this point we are ready to install the new diff back into the truck. So as you saw there, the technique again was to the drive shaft flange goes up first, and then I got this stud lined up with the hole and kind of got that in place, and then you just push these up in there, and then your bolts and your nuts, and that seems to be the simplest way to take the diff in and out without having to wrestle it much. These are torqued to 101 foot-pounds, and then this one is torqued to 64 foot-pounds. Next, we're gonna go through and plug in our full drive actuator and our other plug over here, put our vacuum line on the actuator and then our vent line back on the diff, and then we'll move on to reassembling with the axles. One thing you should do before installing the axles is take a little bit of grease and run it around this channel on the inside of the axle seal, and that helps keep it lubricated so the seal doesn't dry up and end up splitting and cracking and leaking on you. Installing the axles is obviously pretty self-explanatory since you took them out. Like I said, grease that seal right there, and go ahead and cut your wheel according to what side you're going to do. So you're doing the driver's side, cut all the way to the driver's side, passenger side all the way to the passenger side, and that's going to give you all that extra space to be able to get the axle back into your hub. Putting the axle in, the stub obviously doesn't go all the way in immediately. What I did was take this 12mm loose on the spindle to allow us some more slack here, so we're not stretching the brake line as we pull the spindle out of the way to get the axle back in the hub. All right, we got both of our axles in. Torqued our axle nuts to 174. Put our little lock and our cotter pin back. We torqued these lower ball joint bolts to 118 foot-pounds on both sides. Got our drive line re-secured, 65 foot-pounds, just like the rear. All right, we just filled our diff through the fill plug there. It's a little blurry. Through the fill plug, it took almost 2 quarts, about 2 quarts, a little under, I would say. I'm gonna go ahead and put our fill plug back in there and tighten it up. Alright guys, so that's pretty much it. We're just going to put the skid plate back on and put the wheels on, and now he's going to do the break-in procedure, which is 500 miles. I'll put a link to that in the description from East Coast Gear Supply, what they recommend. So thank you for watching. Go ahead and like, subscribe, share the video, and I really hope it helped, and we'll see you next time.